morning and welcome to Becoming a Confident Giver. How do I trust who I give to? This is our second installment of our Becoming a Confident Giver webinar series, and we're really excited to welcome you in today and looking forward to a lot of insight and then also a Q&A session at the end of this webinar. Before we get started, I wanted to share with you, if you enjoyed our first installment and you're here today, I invite you to go ahead and register now to save your seat for our Becoming a Confident Giver winter webinar. This is on how do nonprofits and government intersect. And we will explore that topic, have a great guest speaker on as well. And that's going to be in January 22nd at 11 a.m. So I have Neil, my colleague, in the background dropping some links into the chat. That link for registration is there if you'd like to register now. It'll also be in the follow-up email and a few other emails that you'll receive from us in the interim. So I hope that we get to see you there in January. Next, I just wanted to give a shout out to our podcast. Our second season is in full swing. We just released a podcast episode of part 2 of our conversation on homelessness. Why is solving homelessness so hard? We have a lot of great guests on this episode, but we also have a whole library of episodes that break down complex issues. So if you're interested in learning more about difficult social issues that you'd like to invest in or learn more about, we really encourage you to take a look at it. There's a link in the chat, but you can also find us wherever you listen to webinars. You can also find us wherever you listen to podcasts. And our next episode coming out next week is going to be on the foster care system. So understanding that complex issue, it'll be a 3-part podcast episode series. So we hope that you tune in. All right, so we are going to head back to what we're talking about today. How do I trust who I give to? We have great panelists today, and I'll introduce them a little bit more when we actually dig in and have each speaker talk. But we have Mark Brewer, our CEO and president of Central Florida Foundation, Sandi Vidal, our VP of Community Strategies and Initiatives. And then we also have Mark Freid, who's the CEO of Think Integrated. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about each person before they go ahead and start speaking. But what you'll leave here today is an understanding of the giving map. And if you've never heard of that, that's okay. We'll explain that. We've got a great graphic for you. And the process of going from donor to investor. You'll also leave here with basic skills needed to self-evaluate a nonprofit, inspiration to build your own checklist of what to ask when considering giving, and a new perspective and refreshed way of thinking about trust and relationship building. Now, before we get started, I just want to remind you that we did have a few questions submitted ahead of time, but if you do have a question anytime during this webinar, please put it into the Q&A on your Zoom screen. We will be looking at those, and that will be powering our Q&A session at the end of this webinar. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. He's Mark Brewer. He's our president and CEO of Central Florida Foundation. Mark joined the foundation in 2000 and has earned respect for building community partnerships that meet issues head on and produce measurable results. He's worked with hundreds of individuals, families, and corporations to establish philanthropic plans, endowments, funding strategies, and planned gifts. Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Good morning, Lori. I'm well, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be here and great to be talking about how to be a more confident investor or donor. I want to start this process by having you think for a minute about what attracts you to engage with a nonprofit. Just know that there are plenty of nonprofits, more than 25,000 of them in the metro, that generate almost $28 billion a year in revenue. And so these folks are a sector of the economy that is working really hard in healthcare, education, arts and culture, human services, the ecology, also working around specific kinds of strategies to solve for complex social problems. The reason I bring this up is that people sometimes think, well, gosh, there are so many. How would I know? And how do I make the decision? So I want to start at the beginning of what it actually takes to be a confident giver. The first step to this is to know the people you're giving to as much as you can. And I mean that literally from the standpoint of engaging and talking to them rather than selecting them from a list or just responding to someone who comes to you and asks you to give money. The fundraising side of this is fine, and it's fine for you to respond, but you'll never know as much about an organization until you go sit down with them and talk about the things you're interested in. So the first step is to know who you're giving to, as simple as that sounds. And if you think it's going to be hard to get to know all of those nonprofits out there, it isn't, because you likely have a specific area of interest. It's not like you're just looking for any nonprofit to make a gift to. So start with what you care most about. Start with the things you worry about. Start with the things that you believe if you put your mind and wallet to it, you might be able to make a difference there. Now, look, there are some non-negotiables. And so I want to give you a couple of things that have to be in place in order for you to do this. The first is a nonprofit has to have a 501c3 status. In other words, they have to have filed with the IRS and have that designation, or they have to be an authentic religious organization that meets the criteria. Now, this is a good time for me just to remind everybody that tax laws are in play here when you make gifts. So if you make a gift and you want to take a tax deduction for it, the nonprofit doesn't give you the tax deduction, you claim it. So it's important that the people you give to have 501c3 status. So when you tell the IRS, I gave a gift to this organization and I want to deduct it, they can verify that and you won't have a problem with it. 501c3 status also means that this organization is keeping up its responsibilities and requirements, which are important. You don't want to be giving to people who are in the business and out of the business from day to day. So that's an incredibly important thing. And then the second thing that's non-negotiable in my mind is an element of trust. Are you satisfied with their honesty? Now, look, you don't have to make a federal case out of this. It isn't like you have to, put them up in the spotlight and ask them tough questions until they sweat. If you're comfortable with their honesty, then that's all that really matters. So some of you are going to say, well, no, I'm going to want to read all the financials and I'm going to want to read everything about them for the last 10 years. That's fine. Some of you are going to say, I talked to them and I think they're well-spirited and I think they have the right ideas in mind and I think they're doing good work. And so I want to support that work. That's okay too. What I'm saying here is that it's your decision what makes them givable. There's no standardized strategy for doing it other than some things we'll talk about today. You could adopt all of them. You might not adopt any of them. So with that in mind, the next stage is to think a little bit about how people give and where they give. This is a giving map. It's complicated, but I'm going to break it down for you in simple ways because it determines the kind of giver you are, which will help you decide what's your honesty quotient. How do you know when you trust somebody? So on the left side of this continuum is reactive philanthropy. And we all do some reactive philanthropy. People are hungry, they've got damage after a natural disaster, they're working hard to solve for a problem that isn't easy to solve, but they're making some movement in it. They ask you, will you come and volunteer? Will you give us some money? Will you be involved with us to try to solve this problem? And you react by doing it. In other words, you give when you're asked. The next three pieces of this continuum are your evolution. And you're all somewhere on this continuum, whether you're at this first point or whether you're at the second point. This is an increasing curiosity or concern in an area of interest. So many people will get involved in something, then they get hooked by it, then they really want to go all in and figure it out. In the middle of the continuum is a kind of cross-generational giving strategy where you give together with other people in your family or with other people in your workplace or your community, and you have some plan for how to give. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to give money. I want to give it specifically in this area that they are measuring that I want to make sure gets done. And that puts you square in the center of this continuum. If you go on moving to the right, the next is an increasing curiosity or concern in root cause solutions. So the closer you get to the strategy side of things, the more you're interested in solving what causes the problem instead of just tending to the problem itself. And that's what this stop on the continuum looks like. So what you'll find is that sometimes giving develops into kind of core values and a deeper part of one's priorities. You might have all three of these priorities in mind, or you might continue continue to drift to the right here. And then finally, some givers will ultimately end up at the proactive philanthropy level where you give with a plan. So just think of the difference here. The difference is I call you up and ask you, because I serve on the board of a really important nonprofit, to give some money to this nonprofit, and you do. Or on the other side of this continuum, you know I serve on this board, you call me up and you say, hey, I am really interested in this space. Can I come sit down with your folks and have a conversation about it and see if there's a fit between me and my family and the work that you're doing? So developing these relationships with nonprofits to which you give builds that proactive philanthropy. You don't normally jump into it as a proactive piece because everyone wants to kind of watch it before they make a decision about it. And so moving through this continuum or staying at any part of the continuum is okay. There's no good and bad here. But just know that generally people move from the left to the right here. Because over time, if you're giving when people ask you, eventually you'll ask the question, I've given a lot of money. I wonder if it made any difference. And that will pique you to look closer at the situation and figure out what's going on there. So this map is both an evolution and a growth strategy, but it's also a way for you to place yourself to figure out how much information do I really need to make this decision. Now, while we're on this subject of giving, especially when asked or giving as an investor, I want to talk for a minute about the overhead myth. The overhead myth is a myth that's been around for a long time, and you may buy into the myth, you may have heard of the myth, you may have already left the myth. But the myth is that there's a certain amount of overhead that's good, and all the rest of it is not good. And if a nonprofit's overhead is too high, that's a bad thing. I would suggest to you that the answer to the overhead myth question is to identify what they're doing and the impact you think it's having versus how much it costs to do it, just like you would anything else in life you make investments in. And stop thinking about what's the number. So for many years, it was thought that 10% was the right overhead. And if it's more than that, then more money should go to the mission. And then it was, well, maybe it's 25%. But I would urge you that most of the important work being done is being done by people on the ground doing the work. It's not being done by some service provided out of the clouds for which the people are the overhead. I'm fond of pulling up Fortune 500 financials when I talk about the overhead myth, because what you'll find is that many Fortune 500 companies have extraordinarily high overhead. Apple, for instance, in most of its quarters has a 74 to 76% overhead. Now, if you were giving to a nonprofit that had a 76% overhead, you'd be freaked out and think that's not a good thing. So why wouldn't you sell your Apple stock? Well, you wouldn't do it because that's the amount of money it costs to deliver the technology that drives the share value that you're buying. And so at the end of the day, if it was a 90% overhead, you wouldn't really matter because they're producing what you're investing in. The same is true in the nonprofit sector. If you want to help people, or you want to support arts and culture, or you want to do something in education, it all costs money. The question is it worth it to you to pay for the thing that's being delivered? It's not, you should be able to deliver this for less. It's up to you. It's an investor decision that you'll make every day if you invest in the stock market or if you invest in small companies. You'd make this decision every day. You'd go, well, how fast are they going to deliver the outcomes? And is it worth my money to get that done? Here, you don't get the money back. There's not a return on investment to you. There's a return on investment to the community at large. So if I make an investment and the community gets a return on investment, is it worth the money I invested to do that? And so I would just urge you to spend less time quantifying whether you think the overhead is worth it and more time determining this is what I want to see happen and this is what it costs, or this is what I want to see happen and it's not worth that much to me to pay for it. So it's really that simple a question as you move into it. You'll also find that over time, overheads rise and fall. So organizations with large overheads shrink them over time because they become better at what they're doing. They scale, costs begin to come down. You'll also find large organizations that over time begin to scale. They want to do more things, and they have a theory of change to get that done. but their overhead goes up because it's going to cost more to bring the right expertise or the right infrastructure to get that done. So here, think with your heart, but think like a business person. You're making an investment in an outcome that you should be able to measure. And the question is it worth it? So just a little bit about a takeaway here. All that I've said to you requires you to know something more about what you're looking at than just to read about it. In fact, the takeaway is you can't do this from the sidelines. So if you're on the sidelines like a horse player with with your daily paper trying to figure out whether or not you think the horse is going to come in, you're likely going to fail at this. It's really important to be engaged and then invested because people who invest don't always engage, but the other way around almost always happens. If I'm engaged, I'm going to be invested. You'll know more, you'll have a higher level of high touch sensitivity to trust, and you'll be able to see the activity on the ground, which will give you more confidence in making investments in the organization. Lori?
Thanks, Mark. That was great insight, and I love your analogies all the time. Love them. So thank you for shining some on us today. We are going to welcome our next speaker. Her name is Sandi Vidal. She is our Vice President of Community Strategies and Initiatives for Central Florida Foundation. She works with her team on grant making strategies, and our nonprofit search platform, including other projects within the foundation. She is everywhere, all over the town. You might have seen her before. Her name's Sandi. Welcome, Sandi. How are you today?
I am good. Thank you, Lori. So, hello, everybody, and thanks for being here. I just wanted to say, as somebody who works in the grant making space on a regular basis, not only for our foundation, but with other partners in the community, I'm excited to share some of the things that I've learned over the years when it comes to choosing where I give. And some of it, I think, will just emphasize what Mark has already said. But I do want to also give the disclaimer that giving a contribution to a nonprofit for general operating, it's okay. It's actually good. We, on a regular basis, outsource some of our biggest and most complex issues to nonprofits. And it's really important that we make sure that they have the resources they need to do that work. Go to the next slide. So in my role at the foundation, I'm mostly focused on strategic grant making. So really our approach is to pilot new ideas and programs, to scale programs that already exist and they're working well. It's to accelerate or bring programs to the market faster. For example, we've worked with a housing provider who builds housing, and they were very unique in the market that they were in, and we helped them to get to Orlando a little bit faster. So that would be accelerating that kind of work. And then filling gaps where gaps exist in the market, whether it's there's not a nonprofit that's serving in that space, or there's a particular program that there's a missing connection component, those types of things. From the individual side, which is where we're a little bit focused, or mostly focused today, the place to start is what Mark said. What's important to you? And I think about my dad. My dad always had a really big concern for people going hungry. And so he never wanted to imagine a world where people couldn't get the food or the nutrition that they needed. My passion is really pretty broad, everything from, cute puppies and kitties to homelessness to civic engagement. Mark Freid and I were talking about the role that I've played over the years with the League of Women Voters, which is a place that I've plugged in and gotten involved over the years. But I'm sure each one of you have your own ideas and things that you're interested. So let me pivot for just a moment and imagine we know what we want to give to. How do we know which organizations are the right ones to support and who will be good stewards of our dollars? We'll go to the next slide. So the first thing that I like to do is look at the makeup of the organization. Is it volunteer run? Does it have a CEO? Most will have somebody who's acting in that capacity. Who serves on the board? There's many small grassroots organizations that kind of have a friends and family type of board. This may be the founder as the chair of the board, and there may not be a lot of formal processes and procedures. And this is just that early stage of growth. And as the organization matures and it grows, the expectation is that the board and staff are going to grow with it. So back to the CEO, looking at how long have they been in their role, what's their background, what kind of experience do they come to the organization with, how are they communicating their impact? So, depending on whether or not it's a large organization like, say, a Second Harvest or United Way, they have marketing people who are communicating their impact. They have annual reports and things that you'll be able to find. Smaller organizations, it may be really important to reach out. As Mark said, some of the bigger organizations as well, especially if you're making a big investment in that organization, you really want to get to know them. But the smaller ones, you're going to have a different approach than you would to a bigger organization that has a track record in the community that you can clearly see. The other thing is looking at things like turnover. Is their CEO turning over all the time? Is the staff turning over? Are board members leaving? For the board, you want to look at things like not just the size of the board, but diversity in demographics, age, race, types of work that they do. Do you recognize the people that are on the board, or at least the companies that they work with? And that's not a must for every organization. Again, when you have the smaller organizations, you're going to have that kind of friends and family, and so you may not know everybody, but it's that getting to know them. We also have a portal, and Neil will add the link in the chat, called Nonprofit Search. I will give you a little bit of a disclaimer that we are in a migration mode to a new platform, and so your nonprofit may not show up yet. And if they don't, the ones that you love, call them or email them, let them know that they need to claim their profile so we can get it up and you can view it. But here we take a little bit of a deeper look than maybe their website or their brochure, where we look at the makeup of the board, give you the demographics on it, tell you how many times they meet a year, what is the percentage of people who show up on a regular basis. And if it's less than 65%, they probably need to work on their board structure. They need to make sure that they have people who are really engaged and interested in the direction of that organization. We also look at things like their policies and procedures. What do they have in place? And again, depending on the life cycle of that organization is when you're going to see those policies and procedures in place. So if they've been around for a while and you see that they don't have any plans at all, then that might be something to ask them about. The other place that you can find this information is GuideStar. You can also Google the organization and do a quick search on that, especially if you're not quite familiar. Maybe a friend is telling you about this new organization that they're interested or involved in. That's a great way to be able to learn a little bit more. What is the press said about them? Are there any stories about things that they've done? Is there any kind of scandal that you need to know about? Doesn't happen super often, but there are times when, a CEO or board member goes a little wayward, and it might be something just to have an idea of. It doesn't necessarily rule an organization out. That's a decision that you have to make based on, information that you gain over time. So the next thing to think about, and I think go on to the next slide, is really the financial trends. And this is really about being a good steward of your dollars. And obviously, for most people, your dollars are hard earned. You don't want to just throw them in anybody's direction. You really want to make sure that not only you're contributing to an organization that's really doing good work in the community, but that they're going to be good stewards of your dollar as well. So to understand a little bit more about a nonprofit's financials, you can look at their 990. If they're a small grassroots organization and they're under $50,000, they may file what's called a 990N That's a postcard. It doesn't have any financial information on it, so you're not going to get the information there. For nonprofit search, we do ask for their profit and loss statement so that we can add a little bit of context and information in there for you. For the 990, you can see information about their revenue, you can see their expenses, and you get a kind of a 2-year glimpse at that. You can also see their assets and liabilities. But it's important when you look at a 990 not to just look at 1 year, but to look at the trend. Trends can tell you if they're running a deficit budget every year. I know we do that as a country. It's not good to do that as a nonprofit organization. If it's a year or two, that may be okay. But if, over the last 5 years, they've never been in the black, you might want to ask them questions about why. And how are they actually meeting the expenses that they have? Because if not, you may be paying into their deficit or debt. You also want to look at trends around the community. So thinking more globally, what's going on in the economy? Are there disasters that have recently happened? It's an election cycle right now. Thinking about how that affects the giving in nonprofits. And just as an example, during the 2008 recession, I ran a nonprofit. We actually brought in record dollars during that time. We were getting grants left and right. We had individual donors who were committing more than they ever had. And the reason for that is because people who were less affected by what was going on in the recession were really concerned and wanted to support their neighbors who were really suffering during that time. And so that was a pivot towards basic needs. They really wanted to make sure that people were able to meet those basic needs that they had. And then the next slide, last but certainly far from least, is to answer the question, are the programs working? Do you see needs being met? Are things getting better? So again, depending on the type of nonprofit you're supporting, the outcomes might be different. For example, if your goal is to make sure hungry people get food, an output might just be as important as an outcome for you. It might be important to know that there's a number of people who are getting food. They're not just serving 10 people a week, it's 100 people a week. Did they get the food? Did they get that support that they needed around the food? Are there wraparound services that are helping them to meet some of their other needs? Maybe to be able to get out of the situation that they're in, that they currently need food. So are there advances that are being made towards whatever particular problem that nonprofit is working on? And another example of that is, there's a lot of nonprofits that do medical research. If we're giving to medical research over time, you would expect that there's at least some things that they're trying that are new. There may be some new experimental drugs that they're trying. There may be some new methods that they're trying, but you want to see that there's some sort of activity. Now, that's not to say that nonprofits never fail. All businesses have failures, and we learn from those failures. But at the same time, you really want to make sure that the bottom line question that you're answering is, what difference does the work that they're doing make? How does it serve the constituents, the community, and society as a whole? And again, a small nonprofit is not going to solve world peace, but are they making a difference and an impact in their community and for the things that you're interested and passionate about?
Thank you, Sandi. Illuminating, and I appreciate you giving us some basics, 1, 2, 3. If you don't know where to begin, here are 3 things that you can look at. So I appreciate that. Okay, moving on to our next and final, but certainly not least speaker, we have Mark Freid. He's the CEO of Think Integrated, a local full-service marketing agency. Over the course of Mark's career, he has worked with international companies, innovative entrepreneurs, nonprofits, and community change agents. He's the former board chair of the Holocaust Memorial Resource and Education Center of Florida and board member of the Central Florida YMCA. He's a current board member of the Greater Orlando Sports Commission and has worked with dozens of nonprofit organizations and has worked from the Orlando Ballet to Starter Studio to Central Florida Commission on Homelessness to SALT Outreach to the Reed Charitable Foundation to Lighthouse Central Florida and many more. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Sandi. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate being invited here, and I'm laughing because Lori didn't show me this first slide. And I was it's funny because I was thinking the exact same thing, that this concept of questioning the question. And Lori, I think you found better language to describe that than I was working on, so I appreciate that. But it's true. I'm going to kind of come at this from a little bit different direction. As Lori mentioned in my little bio or intro, I've worked with a ton of different nonprofits in very different capacities. But I run a for-profit company, and I am just a guy in the community, and I am a member of my family who likes to get involved in nonprofits and charitable organizations. And so some of the way that I look at the work, or the opportunity to do work or engage with nonprofits, is really just simply through a personal lens, and to some degree just through things that I've learned over the years, including many of the things that I've learned from Mark Brewer himself. I'm so grateful for his mentorship over the years. But yeah, it's true. When I saw the title of this webinar that said, "How do I trust who I give to?" And I first agreed to sit on the panel, but I did ask myself, is that really the question that I asked myself? Is that really my litmus test? And again, I get involved in a lot of different ways, as a volunteer, as a philanthropist, as an advocate, and to Lori's point, in some cases as a consultant, or we have clients who we work with, sometimes on a pro bono basis, sometimes on a client basis through my company. So we engage in all different ways. But I don't think it's often that I think of whether I actually trust that organization or not, but I certainly have consideration over whether I want to get involved with different organizations. So the question that I always come back to is simply whether there's alignment. And actually, Mark Brewer put it right up front. He said, what attracts you to engage? And that's really the lens that I look through in order to determine who I want to work with and who I want to give to in whatever capacity. And I'll come to that sort of at the end of this little intro. But yeah, that's my question to myself, and that's the question that I put to our team when it's kind of working in a group setting or company wide, is there alignment? And I think of that through a few different sort of questions or lenses. Laura, you can go on to the next. And these are sort of the questions that we ask ourselves, maybe not always formally, but certainly informally. This is what we're considering. And the first thing that I think about is this organization entrepreneurial or established? Now, this is an interesting question, I think, and probably could elaborate and spend a lot more time on, because there's not a right answer to this question. Sometimes we want to work with more established organizations that are, maybe it's because of the different outcomes that we're hoping to achieve by being engaged with them, or because we think in their specific space that having an established organization is going to work better. Sometimes from a business standpoint, when we're providing, again, whether it's on a pro bono basis or a client basis, when we're providing marketing services to a nonprofit, a more established organization is going to have the infrastructure to take the work that we do further, and that's going to be important to us. But oftentimes, we like those small, scrappy entrepreneurial organizations because sometimes they're addressing a new situation, and there aren't more established organizations that are addressing the need in our community, and so naturally, it's going to be a smaller, more entrepreneurial organization that's addressing that need. Sometimes we think that they're closer to the individuals or the community that we want to have impact on. So we like working with small entrepreneurial organizations. And so I can't say that, there's that one of the answers to this question is what's going to determine whether we're going to say yes or no. But this is a question that we ask. Are they entrepreneurial or are they established? And how does that play into this decision? The second question couldn't be more important for me, and this is simply the way that I'm wired. But if I'm not inspired by the leadership of the organization, it's probably not going to be a good fit for me. And I want to work with people who have a big vision, who have big goals, and have the energy to achieve big things. And I like coming alongside people like that and supporting them. And again, sometimes those are in small organizations, and sometimes those folks are in large organizations. But the leadership is really important to me, and it's a question I always ask. I ask the question of whether their values mesh with my values. And again, these are different people are going to have different answers to these things, but I want to work with organizations whose again, whose values are aligned with my values, and we believe that we're supporting something that's important to me or to us. I talk about whether their goals are meaningful to me. And again, different organizations are in different places in terms of their maturity and their growth and the impact that they're trying to have. But at the time that we engage with them, or I personally engage with them, I'm looking at what their goals are and whether that's something that I want to support. Sometimes I ask the question, do they want the help that I want to give? So sometimes I'm in a position where there's a certain thing that I want to do or a certain opportunity that I want to offer. Sometimes that's financial, sometimes that's from sort of a skills-based volunteer perspective. And sometimes organizations want that and sometimes they don't, and that's perfectly fine. But that's a question that we ask as well. What will my support make the difference that I desire is an important question. And finally, will they benefit from my gifts? In other words, if I'm going to contribute something, whether that's time, talent, or treasure, is it going to help them make a difference? Again, sometimes I want to be part of a larger organization or a larger initiative, and I understand that they need a lot of people to be supportive in order to accomplish their mission, in which case my specific gift or my specific contribution is going to be a small part of what they're working on. And I understand that, and that's great. There are certain organizations that I want to support in that way. And sometimes I want us to have a much bigger impact on the work. And so I want to work with a smaller organization or be able to give a very specific thing that's going to help have the impact and kind of create the outcome or the benefit that I'm hoping for. All right, next slide, Lori. So sometimes I think about it from this perspective, in that, and again, this kind of goes back to this questioning of whether we're asking the right question up front. But I do run into enough people who sort of think that if we're, and believe me, I shouldn't say it that way. Let me talk about ourselves first and sort of my growing and maturity around contributing and giving to the nonprofit community. Sometimes in the past, we have thought that since we're the ones giving, since we're the ones making a contribution, again, whether that's an in-kind contribution or a financial contribution, that the organization should accept it no matter what. And I've come to the realization in talking to enough nonprofits and enough organizations that sometimes when we approach them that way, we're actually doing them a disservice. We're forcing them to agree to take on a project or accommodate us when that's not actually what they want or need. So I've really been focused on this for the last few years, that of sort of putting us in, or myself in a different seat in terms of how I engage with an organization. So Laura, you can go ahead and so you can bring up all four of these things. So the things that I think about are we being good listeners? In other words, rather than coming to an organization and telling them what I want them to do or how I want them to have impact or what I expect from them, sitting back and letting them tell me what their need is, what their focus is, what their concerns are, and then seeing if I'm a good fit for them, as opposed to me assuming that I'm the expert in that situation, which honestly, almost all the time, I am not. And I need to think about that. That leads to the next one, is that I think that we need to be humble. You know, we need to recognize that the folks who are working in these nonprofits are doing the work every day, have, you know, however they got engaged with it, that it's their mission that they're committed to. And we need to recognize that we're supporting them. Sometimes that will lead to a situation where we say, we don't want to be involved, and that's okay. But again, humility is going to go a long way in terms of actually providing the kind of support that they need, and then ultimately having the impact that they want and that's meaningful to us too. We need to be open-minded and we need to be strategic, and I'm going to get into that strategic piece in a minute. But I think that it's important for us as the quote unquote givers in this situation to sort of take a step back and to have a little bit more humility about our position. And even though we're the ones, again, giving to the organization, if we're not being humble, if we're not being good listeners, if we're not being open-minded in terms of hearing what they really need, then oftentimes we put them in a difficult position, and or we don't actually help them to achieve what they want to achieve. So I think that this is important. And again, it's something that took me a while to really understand. And I've heard this from nonprofits, and it really resonated when I heard examples of people coming to them without that sense of humility or thinking that they knew best. All right. So this is really sort of what I wanted to get to today and emphasize, is that a lot of my thinking around giving these days is from how do we give from a strategic standpoint. And I mean this both for me personally, for my family, and for our company. And I think that if we think about it in terms of giving falling into these four specific areas, we can be a lot more thoughtful and a lot more impactful, and lead to just a better relationship in terms of how we give and how we sort of help an organization to have the impact that we want them to. So I think about it in this context. There are four ways that we can give. There's I lost my notes on this, but there's advocacy, which I think is a really important part of giving. And advocacy is all the things that you think about that we need to, when we have an organization that we want to engage with, that we speak up for their cause and their mission, that we use our voice and our platform, that we attend their events and activities, that we march when they march, and that we share their mission with the people in our circles. That's a great way to give and to support an organization. Hands-on volunteerism is the next form of giving. And of course, this is what we all know it to be. But again, giving to the organization in ways that they need. So whether that's going to Second Harvest Food Bank and helping to sort food and package food and be a part of that process, where they certainly need help and welcome volunteers, whether it's painting a playground, whether it's engaging in terms of, we've done all kinds of things from gardening at different different organizations and nonprofits. There are all kinds of ways that you can do hands-on volunteerism. And one of the great things about hands-on volunteerism, and this connects with some of the things that Mark was saying, is that it's a great way to really see how the organization operates and to get to know how they operate, who's involved, and what kind of impact they're having. The third way is through skills-based volunteerism, and this includes everything from doing pro bono work to serving on boards, to serving on task forces, to offering your services and expertise for specific projects that they're working on. And this is a higher level of giving where they're appreciative and welcome the specific skills and talents that you have, and you give in a way that maybe others can't. And that's a really powerful way to have an impact on an organization. And then it's only the fourth type of giving, which is financial support. That seems to be the thing that everybody focuses on. And it's certainly one of the most important. Organizations need our financial support. They need our donations and contributions. And there are a few ways that we do this, obviously through direct donations and contributions. And obviously Mark and Sandi can guide you in all of that, but also through making connections and bringing other donors into the circle and helping to bring other people who can provide that financial support. But the point that I want to make is that if we think about giving from a strategic standpoint, and we think about these four different ways that we can give and contribute to the success of a nonprofit or charitable organization, for different organizations, I want to give in different ways. There's some organizations that, for different reasons, they might not be an organization that I'm in a position to give financially or don't want to give financially, but I can support them in a different way. Sometimes it's because I'm bringing a team out and we want to do hands-on volunteerism. Sometimes it's wanting to contribute, again, specific skills and talents that we have. So there are often times when I'll contribute in one of these four ways or one of the first three ways to certain organizations. The point that I want to make is that I never would give financial support to an organization that I haven't given at least probably all three of the other types of support to. And again, that's very much to Mark's point, and maybe to the point of this whole webinar. when we talk about who we trust and who we want to commit to, however we decide to word that, we need to know that organization. We need to understand how they operate. We need to have a good relationship and know how to engage. And by doing that in these other ways, it leads to a much more meaningful financial contribution if that's where we wind up.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate your insights. You got a lot of positive head nodding from Sandi on your slide about is the onus on us. So just reporting back that feedback. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We're going to pull up all the speakers because we have some questions. There we go. Yeah, and Neil will go ahead and just spotlight all of us. So we're back on here. And this is open forum, so feel free to take it. There's no one speaker that this is going to. So the first question that we have is, can you discuss the difference between outcomes and outputs reported by agencies and how donors can look at what information agencies report out about what they do? So really quickly, Sandi has a blog post about outcomes versus outputs on our website. I will link that in the email that we send out after this, but she enlightened us as to what those two words mean and their differences. But go ahead, I'll give it out to everyone now.
So I guess since I wrote a blog about it, I'll start. Really, the difference is an output is what you're doing kind of numerically. If you're serving a certain number of people, if you're doing a certain number of things, those are outputs. What are the things that you're doing to be able to accomplish your goal, or the people that you're serving? How many? The number. Or a milestone. It could be, we're getting to this point in this process, where an outcome is really more focused on that question that I asked before: what difference does it make? What changed as a result? Was there a behavior change? Was there a change in the structure of something? Did something change the way that we do things now? But there has to be some sort of change, and generally it's in a behavior. So for example, if I am trying to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony, the output might be that I'm handing out song sheets to everybody and making sure that they all have the music and they know how to sing the song. The outcome is that everybody can actually sing the song and do it in perfect harmony. So it's that change that happens at the end that produces the results.
Mark, any insight or input on this one? If not, that's okay. Okay.
Not to be the guy who questions everything or challenges everything, but I think that both things are important, right? And I'm thinking actually right now, and I just want to make, and yes, I know, Sandi, that you but I just want to make sure that that's clear to everybody who's listening. It's funny because we recently decided, this is a company initiative to support a very small nonprofit that teaches kids in the Black community to swim. I don't necessarily expect that they're going to change the percentage, they're going to have a radical impact on the percentage of Black children who can swim, but it's so critically important to those individuals, even if it's a dozen, a month, or how, I don't even know what the numbers are at this point. And so that's a case where we're ultimately interested in an outcome where the percentage of, the number of kids who drown changes, or the number of kids who can swim changes or percentage, and where that becomes not a problem in that community. But for now, we know that those individuals who are being taught to swim, that this is so important for them. And that's the impact that we want to have. So for us, in that is a situation where we're simply looking at output and not necessarily some radical outcome. And I only use that as an example again, because that's okay. That's okay. We know that that's a critical need. We know that we can help them to achieve that goal. And that's what our expectation is.
I think I can tie the two together. So many times an output is an efficiency measure, right? We want to see how many people can we touch and share whatever the services we're trying to share. To Mark's point, if you teach a lot of kids to swim, you're probably going to have an impact on saving somebody's life, but we're not going to wait and measure until we find that. We're going to make the assumption that if we train them to swim, they're going to be better off. They have a life skill they didn't have before. So the output in that case would be important. But I also think that over years, if you look at the outcomes that creates, you could tie together some other life skills and some quality of life issues and some life savings that you assume will happen, but it hasn't been measured yet. So, we always look for both. Outcomes for us are a little more important than outputs only because that's the change in the system that matters. But outputs are also efficiency measures. How many people can we serve at this amount? How many people can get through it? And then there are not many things that you could make assumptions. Like a lot of people are doing education programs that they hope will solve for third grade reading skills or get people to graduate from high school. That's a little iffy without an outcome measure. But I think there are a fair number of things in the human services side of the nonprofit sector that are just good things, they're kind of common sense things, that if we do this for people and we do it in the right way, the output will then ultimately more than equal an outcome.
Sometimes I think it's also, this was touched on earlier too, about wanting to support organizations that are addressing the root cause of a problem. That's critically important. And of course, we want that to happen, that we support organizations that change the root cause. But in the meantime, there are individuals or communities that are suffering because that root cause has not been solved. And so supporting organizations that are helping individuals who have that challenge is still important and meaningful work while the root cause is being solved, probably in some cases by some other organization. So again,
right. And I would, adding to what Sandi said earlier, we expect nonprofits who get very little money to do everything. And I think assuming that nonprofits will create and provide the data to show the outcomes is a little more complicated than having academic institutions and others do more of that heavy data lifting to try and test strategies and then share that data to be able to see it. Foundations do that a lot because you just can't, there's not enough money in the world to have every nonprofit doing something really critical and important to also take on the burden of having to prove it with data. And impact data takes a decade to actually measure in regression. And so I don't think, I'm sure Mark wouldn't wait around a decade and not fund anybody taking swimming lessons to wait to see if there's any actual impact in this.
Well put.
Absolutely. Here's another question, and I think part of this has been answered, but this question specifically has to do with qualitative and quantitative factors. So this person works with clients who are at different stages of their growth as philanthropists. Their questions usually boil down to qualitative or quantitative factors or metrics when selecting charitable recipient. Are there any rules of thumb that you use either personally or professionally when selecting a charity? And how do we convey the sense that giving involves both the giver and the receiver? And in some sense, we just have to trust each other and experiment. I think that this covers a lot of what we've talked about. I do think that when it comes down to it, people want a piece of paper that says these are the things that matter. So I'm wondering if anyone wouldn't mind speaking to that.
I can start. We talked a little bit about what interests you, what you're passionate about, but we also talk about the head and the heart. You want to know, is this nonprofit from the quantitative? Are they doing what they say they're doing numbers wise? I'll give you an example. Samaritan's Resource Center in East Orlando's drop-in center. So they are working on homelessness, but they provide just basic needs, showers, laundry, things like that. So they will put out a report that says that we've done X amount of services this year. So that's kind of the quantitative number of people that they're seeing. But the qualitative part is really that story and telling the story of what is that nonprofit doing. And Mark does a lot of that through, the work that he does, and Lori does a lot of that through the work that she does. Mark Freid, not Mark Brewer. He tells stories too. But really, it's telling the story. What difference does it make is important in individual lives. And so, even as we think about the big picture, and we often do think about the big picture, I think Mark alluded to this. It's important to think about the individuals that are being affected by the work that's being done. The homeless person who has a place to go in and rest and get a warm meal and take a shower and get clean clothes, all of those things are really important. It's almost, if not equally as important as the work that they're doing on the other side, where it's case management and connecting with housing resources and making sure that they can get the benefits that they need. And, if they qualify for things, getting mail, types of things that are really important. And so being able to tell that holistic story, I think, is really important. And that's where the more qualitative information comes in. And a lot of that's anecdotal. Somebody gave a comment or had an opinion, but I think that that's very important as well.
I would just add, Lori, I'm a data guy, and the question sounded like it was a question from a data person. So if you're in school and you're getting ready to write a master's thesis or a PhD dissertation, at some point you have to ask the question, what is my methodology? My methodology? What am I going to accomplish here? And am I going to use qualitative or quantitative? And the best answer to that is always mixed modal. Do both of them, because the qualitative will give you the outcome information you're looking for, while the quantitative will give you a sense of the theory of change you're applying to make it happen.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Neil is going to put a survey link in the chat box right now, and it's really short, really quick, 2 minutes at most, to just tell us what your experience was like, if you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed this, we really encourage you to join us at our next webinar in January. Also, if you were intrigued and want to learn more about what we do here at the Foundation, you can visit us at cffound.org. We're happy to start the conversation with you if you're interested in becoming a strategic philanthropist. Thank you to our speakers, Sandi, Mark, and Mark. Thank you for being here, and we hope everyone has an incredible day.